now go on to our next speaker, which is it's going to be the Battle of New Orleans as seen on a contemporary map, a geographic examination of the battlefield by Donald Keith Midkiff. And Mr. Midkiff has been very important in the organization of the symposium as well as the Nunez History Lecture Series, giving many lectures and advice. He has also published the historical novel New Orleans Besieged. And this year especially, he's been integral in the development of the Battle of New Orleans historical tour, which is going on. And so I'd like to introduce Mr. Midkiff.
So the question that was put to me was, how does the geography of the past align with the modern Chalmette and St. Bernard? And it was kind of a strange question, because it's like St. Bernard has erased so much geography, I thought. And as I got working on this, I realized it's kind of like a detective story. You know, the clues are there, they're just hidden. Things have changed, the river has changed its banks, the bayous have faced erosion, and the plantation grid has been eroded with a modern landscape as we've put in streets. Unlike with New Orleans, you know, a lot of the neighborhoods were developed one plantation at a time. And it's kind of easy to see the development and see the old plantations there. Easy to say from this street to this street is a particular plantation. In here, we're looking more of a country area that the streets have been changed. We've now got industrial areas here. So there's a difference here, but the clues are there. And I went on a investigation to find those clues, to see what I could find with my limited tools. So what I had to work from was Google Map, always a place to start. I used Latour's maps. I used the National Park Service, and I used a 1936 U.S. Geological Survey map. They talk about the U.S. Geological Survey map. The nice thing about it is that they took the time to tell me where the river used to be. They also lay out some of the latter 19th century land in their survey, so you can see some of the old property. So there were some hints of where the old plantation boundaries were, but mostly given me a chance to see the shift in the river and map that from Latour's map to a modern map helped me a lot. The tools I've used, pretty straightforward. I have an old Vista machine, and it's good that I do, because the only software that I could use is an old software I developed, I used to develop some of my maps in my novel. And that software does not run on Windows 10. It doesn't. They stopped making it. So I used the Windows 10, of course, to check on and put together my PowerPoint. So this is what the British are looking at. They're coming in from the water, and they're finding a land that seems to be more water than land. So dealing with the swamps and bayous is a major geographical hurdle for them to get past. So a lot of people have talked to you about place names. We're going to talk a little bit more about them. Give you a little glossary here. Lake Bourne, it's a shallow draft. Basically 9 feet in places, so it's very shallow. It's mostly a brackish lake at this time. Bayou Bienvenue, it's navigable. It can handle rather large craft. So if they have a shallow draft, then Bayou Bienvenue can handle its craft, and that's important for the plantations of Chalmette. Cypress Swamp, a trembling prairie. That's something that gets everybody's interest. What the heck's a trembling prairie? It's not scared of anything. It's just that the land does not support you too well. The plains is the area along the river. This is the flat, arable land built up over centuries of constant flooding, and it created a very unique. The Yazoo clay becomes part of it. Colonel Dixon will comment that it just can't support even a man, much less the weight of a cannon, and so don't give him any grief that I couldn't take out the American cannons because I didn't have a good land to support me. So there's been a lot of discussion I've heard over time with people here about what trembling prairie is. Basically, it's water sitting on top of that Yazoo clay with a little thin strata of vegetation floating in it. So when you're going down Paris Road and you're looking over and you're seeing that grass in the water, that's kind of gives a bit of an idea. It's got where the land is, where the water is fresher, you're going to see some of those large reeds. Where the land is higher, you're going to see some trees, and where it's not, you're going to see that grass area. But sometimes that grass isn't so solid an area to walk on. So what did it look like? Now, Latour's map comes out very detailed. Did he draw this while the fighting's going on? I don't think so. Leclerc was really busy in building plantations in this area before the battle, and I have a feeling that he and Latour, who were business partners, had done some extensive surveys, and that was used to help develop a military map for Jackson to use, and that becomes the basis for his map here. So we're seeing here Lake Bourne and its connection in with Bayou Bienvenue. But what does it look like today? A little hard to see. You can see that that Lake Bourne has been heavily eroded. It's pushed back almost to the bayou, and the open end here, this is gone now. But what we can see is this bend in the bayou here, is this bend here where the British left their rear guard. That's their garrison and their depot that they left their munitions in. And then here we have what's called Fort Villeray by the Americans. I don't know what the British called it. And that's going to be down here. That bayou now is called Bayou Villeray, but back in the day it was called Bayou Jumonville. My feeling is that because of its association with Fort Villeray, the name got changed. So we're looking at the cypress swamps of Lower Orleans Parish. And the interesting thing here is to notice that where the 40 Arpent Canal will eventually go is going right through and connecting these cypress swamps. The only place that they don't originally build the 40 Arpent Canal is here on Delaron's property. Paris Road is going to go from this Point of Laurels straight down to the river. So that's pretty much the center of that high ridge that extends back from the river almost a mile. Now, one of the problems with trying to track down Bayou Bienvenue is that it's interrupted by the Mr. Go. And there's been a lot of land loss. So it gets interesting trying to figure out who's who. We got Bayou Bienvenue up at the top, and you have Bayou Maxent coming down here at the bottom somewhere. This makes putting together the geography of the swamps a little difficult, but I think it can be done. One of the questions that I had to answer was why here? Why was the British headquarters at the Villeray Plantation? Because it stood at the end of that chain of bayous and the canal, so it was a direct link back to Lake Bourne. The British hospital was placed at Jumonville because, first of all, it's a large plantation, has a very substantial house, very substantial outbuildings because it was also a large sugar refinery there. And it's protected on the downriver side by a very large canal. And that's something that's key to a lot of these plantations of Chalmette. They have a nice canal, doesn't mark their upper line or their lower line, but comes right up to the house and connects in them with Bayou Bienvenue. Line Jackson, because the Rodriguez Canal, which is actually on the Chalmette plantation property, Rodriguez Canal provides them with a straight edge to build their fortification. And then why is the British Forward Command Post placed at Dilleron Plantation? Because its second floor wraparound gallery gave the British officers an excellent view of the Mississippi River and Line Jackson. In fact, they could look back towards Bayou Bienvenue a whole mile. So, I mean, it's a very good observation point to work from. Now, everybody talks about the different plantations. The only reason to bring this in, this is the Villeray Plantation. Notice it's in kind of a West Indian style. Lacoste Plantation, we're still dealing with kind of a change of a West Indian style French, but it's on top of a Spanish bottom floor. The Dilleron Plantation. This is the first of the Louisiana plantation style homes, and this wraparound gallery is what the British will use as their observation platform. Now, of course, since this is where your command center is, this is natural to bring your officers who are injured, and this is why Gibbs and Pakenham will both die here rather than at Jumonville. The McCarthy House. Now we're dealing still with an elaborate form of the same type of Louisiana plantation house, but notice again we have a nice wraparound gallery to work from, and that's that height and that protected gallery that's important. So we have some difficulty in tracing the waterways. Trying to go from here down here to Bayou Jumonville, or Bayou Villeray today, and coming in, and then tracing Bayou Bienvenue on through. But you can see between the two a comparison of what was there. Now this area was land in 1936, but has been turned into a retention pond since that time. Give an idea of the 1936 map. Notice that the 40 Arpent Canal connects the canals that are draining the back end of Chalmette, but it skips over the highland here on this portion of the Dilleron property. What is 40 arpents? 40 arpents is 1.5 miles. Arpentage is the French word for surveying, and an arpent is close to being an acre, so a square arpent would be an acre. A toise is a survey rod. The measurement that they used placed it at about 6 feet. So an arpent was made up of 32 toises. Sorry, my French is bad. But that gives about 192 feet. A lot of people will use 200, and I would willing to say that the surveying of the time was a little loose. If somebody used 200 and somebody used 192, no one back then was really going to take them to court. But notice that the plantations around the battlefield, the Languille, McCarty, Rodriguez, these are small plantations. They're giving up being used as sugar plantations. They're being turned now into summer homes. This is the rich folks' way of getting out of town. New Orleans is hot in the summer, and it's full of yellow fever. So let's go to where it's cool, and we can be healthy. If this trend had continued, I'm sorry to say that Chalmette might have been a second garden district. But notice that we're still holding on to sugar. Chalmette had just finished increasing his holdings right before the battle, so he had a lot of debt. And when he saw that his plantation was destroyed and the ground was unusable because the British had buried their dead on the plantation grounds, he will go home into New Orleans and shoot himself rather than face bankruptcy. Bienvenue de la Ronde. These are the Pakenham oaks, which were planted after the battle. This is about 1821. And it was, or 1819, it was a celebration of de la Ronde's son's 21st birthday. But all of this is high land, and here we see Paris Road going out towards what Latour called Point of Laurels. So the laurels that he's talking about are the cherry laurel, not the type that Caesar would have wanted. So Line Jackson and the cypress swamp. The cypress swamps where Line Jackson is at the upper end of the Chalmette plantation have come to about 600 yards of the river. This is the smallest width of plains above the Villeray plantation. There is a story that I encountered that said that Saint Gamay of the Orleans Battalion of Volunteers had gone to Jackson and said to him, I have a friend who came over from Paris, from France, and he said, hey, looking at this place, this is a perfect location because a small number of men could hold off a large army for a very long time because it's so defensible. So it may have been that this was already in Jackson's mind. He certainly would have used the Rodriguez Canal as a geographic point to marshal his troops before the night battle and then advance en masse towards the de la Ronde plantation. They needed a place to meet, and they needed a place to fall back to. And since they're falling back in the middle of the night, and it's already getting very foggy, the commanders had to know the land around the Rodriguez Canal very well. Of course, I had to throw in the National Park Service map to show you how difficult it is for the British to get around that small section of arable land. We're back to Latour's regional map showing all the different plantations and showing the waterways of this area. One of the things that is important to note is that here, going towards what is today Judge Perez Drive, we've got American pickets lined up here, and they're back here as well. What Jackson is afraid of is that the British will figure out how to get through the cypress swamp and get to this canal, the Pyrenees Canal. If they can get to the Pyrenees Canal without him realizing it, he's dead. His army has to surrender. He's surrounded. He keeps a large amount of troops behind the lines, and they're there for one reason, to give him warning. And these are Kentucky troops back here. They don't have any guns. They're there more for moral support, as they were to pick up guns from the dead, I guess. But they're there to act use their bodies to stop the British advance for some reason. On the day of the battle, Jackson will bring his troops forward. His reserves will come up close to the line, because what is the weakness of Line Jackson? It's able to stand up to the cannon fire. But what's the central weakness of Line Jackson? It's a straight line. It does not have the twists and turns in it that a European fortification would require. So if there's a break in any one part of that line that's not sealed immediately, the whole line is going to wind up failing. Lucky for Jackson, that's where the Yazoo clay came in. The British never had a chance to set up their cannons properly, while the American cannons were above the mud on nice packed earth platforms. Here's what we've all been waiting for. My interpretation of the tour with Google Maps. If they had a baby, it might look like that. So we have Paris Road going out through Point of Laurels. This is Fort Villeray, one of the side bayous here and canals. This is here's Jumonville coming in. Notice this large canal here. This allows the British to feel that their hospital can be defended. The only fighting that took place here is going to be on December 23rd, when Morgan comes up and exchanges a few musket shots with the British rear guard. And then, realizing that the British are there in large numbers, he goes back to Terre-Boeuf, and just in case the British land there as expected. This is Line Jackson coming through here, and it ends right about, I believe it's Pirate Drive and Livingston here in Chalmette Vista. Right in front of it is the St. Bernard Hospital. The area around the highway here, this is the reverse Redan. My job turned out to be to try and get the different maps to have the same scale by using particular points of reference, and by using the transparency capabilities of the software to allow me to superimpose one on top of the other and get them oriented. So the answer to the question is that we need more work on this. We honestly do. We need to use a better graphics tool, one that allows for more precision, where I could use images that have transcription errors. You get a map down offline, and it has been copied by somebody, and maybe the original image or some copy of it has been distorted over time. When I originally downloaded the image of Line Jackson, it measured out at 1760, quite a bit bigger than the 1660 that it should have been. So what happened, what added to that, was some sort of distortion that took place. And I went back and looked at Latour, not his description of the individual batteries and stuff, because that's obviously has a transcription error of its own in the publication. But looking at the number of toises that he says that line, since he was a Frenchman, I figured that the number given for toises was going to be a lot more accurate than the number he gave for yards. So my tools allowed me to make a gross approximation of what's there, but it's not the end all. And if somebody comes up and says, can't be, there's no way that Line Jackson went that far into and close to Chalmette Vista, I would go, okay, maybe you're right. But it looks like it does when you match up some of the key points that I used, the McCarthy House and other points of reference, and using the 1936 survey map showing me what the old riverbed looked like, so I could get the river to line up at the right size, and to get that to line up with the Google Maps. It takes a lot of tedious work. The outcome still, no matter how hard I work with the tools I have, is going to be a best guess. With better tools, with better computer, I think it could be done, and I think we could map out a very accurate. Now, will we know that there was fighting on aisle 7 of Walmart? I don't think so. Was there a ridge that they placed Judge Perez on top of that Jackson was afraid they might find something? Why was there pickets placed near where Judge Perez is today if there wasn't some sort of high land that could have been used? A swamp, the cypress swamp, is not just water. It's land and water. It has dry land in it. It has oak trees. And anybody ever heard of live oaks that want to be wet all the time? No. They'll tolerate it, but they don't like it. They won't grow into wet soil. The roots won't grow down into wet soil. So these are one of the biggest things that they've got is persimmons. That's a big part of the cypress swamp here. We call them plaquemines down here. There is cherry laurel, and there is tulip trees, all sorts of varied vegetation, sedge grass being the biggest one. And it was sedge grass that the British hid behind in their advance across the ditches of Chalmette as they're advancing on Line Jackson. So basically the British advance, while we like to see it in the movies as a continuous roll of kilted Highlanders, they didn't wear kilts, okay? Basically they're going from ditch to ditch. When they get to the next ditch, they jump down into it and they hunker down and they see if it's ready to go to get the next one. Is everybody caught up with me? So it was an advance, slow, tedious. Some people might question that it was too slow and too tedious. But the reality is, had Colonel Mullins done his work the night before and found where the ladders and the fastenings. Does anybody know what fastenings are? That bundle of sugar cane. It's anything that's bundled together, but do you know what the purpose of that bundle of sugar cane was for? The Rodriguez Canal is about 8 feet wide, and it's an average of about 5 feet deep. 2 feet of that is water. The rest of it is mud. And that's mud, that's clay. It's not going to support anything. You put a ladder up in that 2 feet of muddy water, and the ladder's just going to go down. But if you put enough fastenings in it, you're going to give the ladder some support. Then to make things really nasty, the Americans had cut brambles, thorny bushes, and put those branches down there. So it was full of a jumble of thorns and mud, and it was miserable. Without the fastenings to fill up the bottom of the canal, without the ladders to get over that 5-foot wall that wet moat provided, that line that was the Rodriguez Canal, Then they have to get on top of the banquet. Everybody know that in New Orleans we call sidewalks banquets. Well, it's a military term too. So you get to that banquet, that brings you up 2 feet. Now you've got another 6 feet of parapet to get over. Without a ladder, that becomes difficult. So that's why it was critical that they have the ladders and the fastenings on that attack. Had they been faster, they would have suffered fewer casualties. But they did not have any way of accomplishing their goal without the ladders and fastenings. So that's geography of a sort. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Okay, so what we learned so far is that I assume that the British attacked in the final battle, January 8th, in Chalmette, because they were ignorant of the way the coast was and the topography and stuff. They were ignorant. But then we find out that they weren't really that ignorant because they had been there all along. So why do they go this way when they know their supply lines are so far away? It's winter like it is now, and it makes no sense to me.
Well,
They not hold off, or why they not go a different way, or why?
the battle started late. The British were late getting out of Baltimore and getting down to Jamaica and picking up their fleet and coming here. And they had to make up time. The original goal was to land at Mobile, walk overland to Baton Rouge, and then come down. Because New Orleans was the bank. With New Orleans, the money in the warehouses here, all of the general officers would have retired in splendor. So that was the goal, was always New Orleans. And this Treaty of Ghent was designed with the idea that the British would have New Orleans. There was no question about it. They expected to take it. So when they were told, when Cochrane was told in Pensacola that there was a door open to New Orleans that would take him within 2 miles of the city, he jumped for it. Now I don't have to walk. I don't have to spend all that time. And we could find ourselves fighting at Baton Rouge only to find that the war's over. They all knew the war was ending. That's part of the reason why everybody's so cautious. Who wants to be the general at the last great battle with a lot of casualties? We saw that in Vietnam, you know. So that was one of the things that affected the British, was that they knew the game clock was running and it was almost game over. The timing was up. They were late getting started, and Cochrane saw this as an opportunity to get it going faster. The other thing is that he was an admiral and not a general, and he didn't see a problem with the water in the bayous where a general would have said, no, I'm going to Pascagoula, and I'm going to land at Pascagoula, and I'll walk over to, you know, what today we call Chef Mentor, and I'd cross there, and I'll take New Orleans that way, which would have been a really good idea. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a presentation. Very
Thank
good.
you.
I know you haven't seen that before.
No, I
today,
haven't
so,
seen that.
very, very good.